Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time, not to the grand castles and noble courts you see in the movies, but to the muddy, bustling streets of a medieval town. Imagine it, the air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, wet earth, and something vaguely meaty roasting over an open flame. You can hear the clamour of the blacksmith's hammer, the distant bleating of sheep, and a chorus of vendors shouting their wares. As you trudge along the cobblestone path, you pass a man with a wooden tray around his neck, selling something that looks like lumpy, dark cakes. You probably wouldn't survive a single afternoon here without getting sick from the food. And yet, this is where we're headed, into the surprisingly grimy world of medieval junk food. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are right now and what time it is for you. And now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you step into the past, you feel the uneven ground beneath your feet. The main road is less a road and more a shared space for people, animals, and the occasional stream of, let's just say, less than fresh water. Over by the market square, a cluster of vendors has set up shop. You don't see any shiny food trucks or bright signs, instead it's just a few people hunched over makeshift tables or with baskets slung over their arms. The offerings are simple, meant to be eaten on the go by labourers, travellers, and anyone without a kitchen of their own. These folks are the medieval equivalent of your late-night food truck, serving up quick, cheap, and often dubious treats. Think of it as the original fast food, but with a lot more risk involved. You spot a vendor selling something called waffles, which are thin, crispy wafers pressed with an iron. Another is hawking roasted chestnuts, their smoky aroma mingling with the general market smells. A young boy holds up a skewer of what looks like small, roasted birds. The sheer variety of food is a bit of a surprise. A far cry from the plain, bread and pottage diet you might imagine. This was the lifeblood of the common person. A way to grab a quick bite without the fuss of cooking. The hygiene, however, is a whole other story. There are no health inspectors here, no refrigeration, and sanitation is a concept that hasn't quite caught on yet. Food sits out in the open, exposed to dust, flies, and whatever else the medieval wind blows in. The vendors themselves probably haven't washed their hands in a while, and the ingredients, well, you don't really want to know where they came from. Historians still argue whether the high rate of foodborne illness was just an accepted part of life or a major cause of death among the poorer classes. You're watching a woman buy a handful of something fried and greasy from a man whose hands are stained with grime. She doesn't seem to mind. You probably would. This is the reality check of our journey. The appeal of convenience always trumps cleanliness, even when the consequences are dire. A quirky tidbit about this era is that some vendors would add a little bit of honey to their food, not just for sweetness, but because they believed it had a minor preservative effect. It probably didn't, but it made their mysterious meat patties a little tastier. And that's all that mattered. As you move closer to one of the stalls, a woman with a sharp eye and even sharper wit beckons you over. She's selling what she calls patties, made of minced meat and spices, fried until they're a dark, crispy brown. She assures you they are freshly made, a term which here seems to mean they were made sometime in the last 24 hours. The main historical fact to remember is that most of this street food was made from the less desirable parts of the animal, the offal, the trimmings, and the tougher cuts. This was a way to make use of every part of the beast, ensuring nothing went to waste. So, that spicy patty you're looking at, it might be heart, liver, or a mix of various bits that the butcher couldn't sell to a proper kitchen. The spices, however, are a new and exciting development. As trade routes open up, even these humble vendors are starting to get their hands on a bit of pepper and a touch of ginger, turning a questionable patty into a slightly more appealing, albeit still questionable, treat. The smells, the sights, the questionable sanitation. This is the real junk food of the past. And it's a world away from a modern-day burger. You can almost taste the grease and the grit on your tongue. Almost. As you step away from the vendor of questionable patties, your senses are assaulted by a new aroma. It's sweet, but with a sharp, almost biting undertone of spice. You follow your nose to a small stall where a man is pulling dark, dense-looking loaves from a simple wooden box. He calls it pepper bread. This isn't the gingerbread you might be picturing. all soft and Christmassy. This is something much older and spicier. The main ingredient is honey, used as the primary sweetener, which gives the bread its dark color and sticky texture. But the real kick comes from a generous, almost reckless, addition of pepper, a spice so valuable it was once used as currency. It's a taste that would be entirely foreign to your modern palate, a mix of sweetness and heat that you just don't find in today's desserts. The pepper isn't just a flavor note, it's the star of the show. The craze for pepper bread and other heavily spiced honey cakes was a surprisingly widespread phenomenon. This simple treat was a way for the average person to taste a little bit of the exotic, while lords and ladies were enjoying elaborate, multi-course meals flavored with expensive imports like saffron and cloves. The common folk were getting their spice fix from these dense, humble loaves. Historians still argue whether the pepper was added to make the bland bread more exciting or if it was also used to mask the taste of low-quality ingredients, which, given the overall lack of sanitation, is a pretty good bet. A quirky tidbit is that some bakers would even add a pinch of dried ginger or cinnamon if they could get their hands on it, turning a simple pepper bread into a truly coveted, albeit cheap, snack. You watch as a burly labourer hands over a coin for a chunk of the dark loaf, biting into it with a look of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. This was their junk food, their sugary, spicy indulgence. The act of eating on the street was a form of social levelling. You could be a simple serf or a visiting merchant, and you'd both be eating the same sticky, peppered bread. The street vendors were the great equalizers of the medieval diet. They didn't cater to the rich. The wealthy had their own kitchens and servants for that. These vendors were for the working class, for the people who were on the move, who didn't have the time or the resources to prepare their own meals. The food they sold was a reflection of necessity and a small touch of luxury in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Think about it. In an age where most of your food was bland pottage and tough bread, the chance to bite into something sweet, sticky, and spicy was a genuine treat. It was an escape from the monotony of the everyday. A brief moment of culinary excitement. It's a far cry from the modern concept of junk food, where we're spoiled for choice, but for them, this was the pinnacle of a quick, tasty snack. The prices for these treats were, of course, a reflection of their ingredients. A simple loaf of unadulterated bread was cheap, but anything with spices, especially pepper, would cost a bit more. A main historical fact about this era is that the value of goods was often tied to their origin. A small amount of pepper, which had to be transported thousands of miles from the east, was more valuable than a whole basket of local apples. This economic reality shaped the street food market in profound ways. The vendors were constantly balancing cost and flavor, trying to create something appealing without pricing it out of reach for their customers. The pepper bread vendor, for example, would probably buy his spices in a ground, mixed-up form, making it impossible to tell their quality, but also making them more affordable. He's not selling you pure spice. He's selling you a flavor experience. You can almost see the tiny, dark flecks of pepper embedded in the honey-soaked bread, waiting to deliver their fiery kick. The air feels a little bit warmer just thinking about it, leaving the spicy scent of pepper bread behind. You follow the sound of a woman calling out, her voice a reedy song among the market's cacophony. She's standing behind a large, woven basket, and in it are small, rustic-looking pies. These aren't the elaborate lattice-topped creations of modern bakeries. They're simple, lumpy parcels of dough, often sealed by hand with a crimped edge. She's selling what she calls apple pies, though you get the distinct sense the contents are a bit of a mystery. This is where we get into the realm of what was considered a true luxury for the common person, fruit. While most of a peasant's diet consisted of grains and vegetables, a sweet fruit pie was a rare, cherished indulgence. It wasn't something you ate every day. It was for a special occasion, a market day treat, a moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure. The pies themselves were a clever way to make a few pieces of fruit go a long way. The filling would be chopped apples, maybe a few berries if they were in season, mixed with honey or a bit of cheap molasses to sweeten them. The dough was often made with coarse flour and animal fat, making it tough and a little greasy, but also very filling. The whole thing was a calorie bomb, a dense package of energy perfect for a labourer who needed to get through the afternoon. The main historical fact to grasp here is that fruit, especially apples, was seasonal and perishable. Without refrigeration, A surplus of fruit had to be used quickly, and baking it into pies was a perfect way to do just that. A quirky tidbit is that the crust itself was often so hard and thick that it wasn't even meant to be eaten. It was more of a container, a way to hold the precious filling inside while it was being cooked and transported. Imagine a disposable pie tin you could nibble on if you were really hungry. The apple pie vendor's pies are a testament to the ingenuity of the medieval cook. She would likely have made these at home, using whatever she had on hand. This was a form of cottage industry, a way for a family to earn a little extra money. You can picture her in a small, smoky kitchen, kneading the dough by hand, her fingers stained with the dark juice of the apples. There was no precise measuring, no fancy recipes. It was all by feel, by instinct, passed down from mother to daughter. This is a far cry from the refined, precise baking of today, but the end result was still a beloved treat. Historians still argue whether these pies were more often savoury than sweet, with fillings of meat or vegetables. But the fruit pie was certainly a popular variant, a sweet beacon in a savoury world. As you lean in to get a better look, you can see the imperfections of the pies, the uneven shape, the occasional bit of burnt crust, the little cracks that reveal a glimpse of the dark, syrupy filling. This lack of uniformity is part of their charm. Each pie is unique, a handmade creation. The woman selling them probably has no idea what a macro or micronutrient is, but she knows that these pies give people a burst of energy and a moment of happiness. She sells them with a smile, knowing she's providing a little taste of luxury to people who rarely experience it. It's a sweet, simple transaction, one that speaks volumes about the value of a small treat in a world where food was a matter of survival, not pleasure. For a moment, you almost forget the mud, the smells, and the general grime. You just see the pie, and it looks kind of delicious. The very idea of biting into that warm, sweet filling, with its simple, unadulterated flavour, is a strangely comforting thought. It's a taste of history, a small bite of medieval happiness. As you continue your stroll through the market, the aroma of a different kind of food catches your attention. It's savoury and a little smoky, a scent that promises something substantial. You follow it to a vendor who is selling what he calls sausages. Though they look nothing like the perfectly uniform links you're used to, these are thick, lumpy things, skewered on a stick and sizzling over a small charcoal fire. The vendor holds one up, its casing taut and glistening with grease. He assures you they are pork, but the truth is, the contents of these medieval sausages were a great, greasy mystery. This was a way to make use of the odds and ends of a butcher's shop, the tough cuts, the organ meats, and a liberal amount of fat, all ground together and stuffed into an intestinal casing. This kind of sausage was a masterclass in medieval recycling. It took what was otherwise unpalatable and turned it into a quick, hot meal. A main historical fact is that spices were crucial here, not just for flavour, but to mask the taste of questionable ingredients. The vendor likely used a mix of pepper, cloves, and herbs like thyme or rosemary to make the sausage palatable. A quirky tidbit is that the colour of the sausage was also a big deal. Some vendors would add a bit of blood or a red herb to make the filling look richer and more appetizing, even if it was just a hodgepodge of scrap meat. You watch a man hand over a few coins for a sausage, biting into it with a grunt of approval. He doesn't ask what's in it, and you get the distinct feeling he doesn't want to know. He just wants a hot meal to get him through the day. The sausage vendor's pitch is simple and direct. He's not promising a culinary masterpiece. He's promising a warm, filling meal. This is the essence of medieval junk food. It's not about gourmet quality, it's about quick sustenance. Historians still argue whether the high rate of mystery meat in these sausages contributed to the spread of certain diseases, but the truth is, people were often too hungry to care. The risk was worth the reward of a full belly, and in a world without health and safety regulations, the concept of a safe food was a relative one. You might find a bit of gristle, a piece of bone, or a surprise organ, but you would also find a satisfying, savoury meal. The sausage vendor is a one-man show. His stand a simple operation of a fire pit, a stack of wooden skewers, and a pile of his mysterious meat tubes. He likely made them himself, mixing the ingredients in a large bowl before stuffing them by hand. This level of self-sufficiency was common for street vendors. They were a bit of a jack of all trades, part butcher, part cook, part salesman. They didn't have the luxury of a supply chain. They had to make do with what they could get their hands on. The sound of the fat sizzling and spitting on the fire is strangely hypnotic, a soft hiss that promises warmth and a full stomach. As you watch him hand over another sausage, you can't help but be impressed by the sheer resourcefulness of the operation. It's a bit gross, a little bit scary, and totally fascinating. This is the food of the people, the food that fueled an entire society, one greasy sausage at a time. The simple act of eating something hot and savory on a cold day was a small luxury, a moment of comfort in a world that didn't offer many. You can almost feel the warmth of the stick in your hand. The greasy scent of sizzling sausages fades, replaced by a new, sweeter smell carried on the breeze, the deep, intoxicating aroma of fried dough and sugar. You turn a corner and there's a small boy, no older than 10, holding a tray of dark, misshapen cakes. He calls them fried fritters, but you'd probably just call them donuts. These are the ancestors of the modern pastry, a simple treat made from flour, honey, and a liberal amount of fat, all fried in a bubbling cauldron over a small fire. They look a bit rustic, a little burned on the edges, and absolutely delicious. This was a classic piece of medieval junk food, cheap, easy to make, and a surefire way to get a quick hit of calories and sweetness. The fritters, or donuts, came in many different forms and had a variety of names depending on the region. A main historical fact is that they were often made with a simple dough that could be easily mixed and fried on the spot, making them a perfect street food. A quirky tidbit is that some recipes called for adding a bit of cheese or even leftover breadcrumbs to the dough, turning it into a surprisingly savory and filling snack. This was all about making the most of what you had, a theme that runs through all medieval street food. The fritters were fried in a type of animal fat, likely lard or tallow, which gave them a distinct, savory undertone that would be foreign to a modern palate used to vegetable oil. You watch as a woman, with a heavy cloak pulled tight against the chill, buys a handful of the fritters from the boy, her fingers sticky with honey and grease. The simplicity of these fried treats is part of their appeal. You don't need a fancy oven or complex ingredients. All you need is a fire, a pan, and some fat. This made them accessible to even the poorest of vendors, who could set up a makeshift stall with very little capital. Historians still argue whether the popularity of these fried doughs was a result of their taste or simply their low cost and high calorie count, a practical choice for people who were constantly working and burning energy. Either way, they were a staple of the street food scene, a comforting, warm snack on a cold day. The boy selling them probably learned the recipe from his mother, a tradition passed down through generations. He's not just selling a donut, he's selling a piece of his family's history. A recipe that has survived for centuries. The sound of the hot fat, a gentle sizzle and pop, is the only advertisement the boy needs. It's a sound that promises warmth and a full stomach. A sound that says, "Come get a little taste of happiness." The fritters are often finished with a drizzle of honey, or a simple roll in a mixture of sugar and ground spices if the vendor was feeling fancy. This added layer of flavor was a small touch of luxury, a way to make a simple piece of fried dough feel special. This is the art of medieval junk food, taking the most basic ingredients and making them feel like a feast. You can almost feel the warmth of the fresh fritter in your hand, its sugary surface sticky against your skin. It's a simple pleasure. But in this world, those are the ones that matter most. The sweet, lingering scent of the fried fritters hangs in the air, a testament to the power of a simple sugary treat. As you move on, you notice something that ties all these foods together: the presence of cheap, readily available sweeteners, the honey in the pepper bread, the molasses in the fruit pies, and the honey on the fritters. These aren't just for flavor, they're the economic engine of medieval sweets. Refined white sugar, as we know it, was an incredibly expensive luxury, a commodity that traveled all the way from the Middle East and was only accessible to the wealthiest of nobles. For everyone else, honey and molasses were the go-to. This is a fundamental difference in how they experienced sweetness, and it shaped the entire flavor profile of their snacks. A main historical fact is that honey was a staple of the medieval kitchen, not just for desserts but for medicine and brewing as well. It was a local product, often harvested from beehives in the countryside, which made it far more affordable than imported sugar. Molasses, on the other hand, was a byproduct of sugar refining and was cheaper still. It had a darker, more robust flavor that would dominate any dish it was added to. Historians still argue whether the popularity of molasses-based sweets was due to its flavor or its sheer affordability. But it's clear it played a key role in making junk food a reality for the masses. A quirky tidbit is that vendors would sometimes mix honey and molasses together to create a unique flavor, a sort of signature sweetener for their stall. You can almost see the dark, sticky liquid being ladled from a wooden bucket. Its smell thick and a little cloying in the damp air. The use of these simple sugars highlights a major divide in medieval society. You could tell a person's social status by the kind of sweetener they used. The noble's kitchen would have a small, locked chest where precious cones of white sugar were kept, while the common person's pantry would have a jar of honey or a barrel of molasses. This wasn't just a matter of taste, it was a symbol of wealth and power. The vendor selling his honey-drizzled fritters is a small-time entrepreneur, working within the confines of this economic reality. He knows his customers can't afford sugar, so he makes do with what's available, creating a food that is both delicious and accessible. The simple sweetness of the honey is a comfort, a familiar flavor in a world of otherwise harsh tastes. As you stand there, watching the vendor, you realize that the story of medieval junk food isn't just about what they ate, but about the economics behind it. The need for cheap, high-calorie food drove vendors to use ingredients that were available, even if they were less desirable. The use of honey and molasses is a perfect example of this. It's a story of resourcefulness, a story of making something out of nothing. The vendor doesn't need to advertise his use of honey. The smell of it, thick and sweet, is enough to draw in customers. It's a smell that promises a taste of something good, something that feels like a treat without costing a fortune. This is the simple reality of the medieval street. A reality built on a foundation of sticky, sweet, and often unrefined ingredients. The sound of a single bee buzzing by, perhaps drawn by the scent, is a small, quiet reminder of where all this sweetness came from. You leave the sweet smells of honey and molasses behind and follow the faint sound of music and laughter. It leads you to a bustling, smoky, and slightly rowdy establishment. This isn't a royal feasting hall, it's the local alehouse. In the medieval world, the alehouse was the original fast food joint, a place where you could get a quick meal and a drink without having to cook it yourself. It was a hub of social activity, a place for travellers, labourers, and town gossip. The atmosphere is thick with the smell of spilled ale, wood smoke, and the heavy aroma of cooked meat and bread. The alehouse was a crucial part of the medieval food system for the common person. The main historical fact is that water was often unsafe to drink, so ale, a low-alcohol fermented beverage, was the beverage of choice for everyone, including children. A quirky tidbit is that ale was often brewed on site, with each alehouse having its own unique recipe, and a green branch hung outside was the sign that a new batch was ready. Inside, the food was simple and hearty. You'd find large loaves of bread, bowls of thick pottage, and, if you were lucky, a roasted chicken or a piece of cheese. The food was meant to be shared, and it was a communal experience. You might sit at a long wooden table with strangers, all of you enjoying a cheap and filling meal. Historians still argue whether the alehouse was more of a public service or a for-profit enterprise. The truth is, it was probably a bit of both. The alehouse provided a much-needed service, a place to rest, eat, and drink in a world that didn't have many public spaces. It was the great equalizer, a place where people from different walks of life could come together. You can see a group of merchants huddled in one corner, their voices low as they discuss business, while a group of labourers laughs and sings at another table, their faces flushed from the ale. The food, though simple, was a lifeline for many. You could get a meal for a single coin, a price that was accessible to almost everyone. The barmaid, with her sleeves rolled up, moves quickly between the tables, her voice sharp as she takes orders and her movements precise as she pours the dark, foamy ale into wooden tankards. The alehouse menu was a testament to practicality. You wouldn't find a long list of options. Instead, you'd get what was available and what was cheap. The pottage was often made from whatever vegetables were in season, simmered for hours in a large cauldron over the fire. The bread was likely a bit stale, but the ale would make it go down easy. It was the perfect fast food, quick, filling, and served in a setting where you could relax and socialize. The sound of a lute playing a simple tune adds to the atmosphere, a soft, soothing melody that cuts through the noise of the crowd. The smoke from the fire dances in the air, creating a hazy, comfortable warmth. For a brief moment, you forget the muddy streets and the harsh realities of medieval life. You are just a person in a warm, welcoming alehouse, enjoying a simple meal in the company of others. The low hum of conversation is a lullaby, a soft background noise that soothes you and makes you want to stay a while. Leaving the warm, boisterous alehouse behind, you notice a traveller on the road, hunched over something he's holding in his hands. As you get closer, you see it's a lumpy, half-moon-shaped parcel of dough with a crimped edge. He's eating a pasty. This was the original handheld meal, the medieval version of a sandwich or a burrito. Designed for portability and a quick, filling bite, the pasty was a staple of the labourer's diet, a clever solution to the problem of eating on the go when you didn't have a plate, a fork, or a clean surface to put your food on. A main historical fact is that the pasty's thick, hard crust was not just for holding the filling, it was a crucial part of the design, meant to keep the contents warm and clean. And it also acted as a form of insulation. A quirky tidbit is that the crimped edge of the pasty was often left uneaten, serving as a handle for dirty hands to hold the food. This was especially important for miners or farmers, whose hands were often covered in grime and grit. They could hold the pasty by the thick crust, eat the filling, and then discard the dirty handle. You can picture it now, the man you just saw, his hands smudged with dirt, holding the pasty by its handle and biting into the delicious, savoury filling. Historians still argue whether the pasty originated in England or France, but its popularity and practicality were undeniable across medieval Europe. The fillings were as varied as the vendors who made them. They could be a simple mix of minced meat and vegetables, or a more elaborate concoction of cheese and herbs. The pasty was a versatile vessel for whatever ingredients were available, a testament to the resourcefulness of the era. The dough was often a coarse, whole-grain flour, mixed with animal fat to make it sturdy and waterproof. This wasn't a light, flaky pastry, it was a tough, dense shell designed for a rugged life. The pasty vendor, if you were lucky enough to find one, would have a basket of these warm parcels, ready to sell to passers-by. The sight of a fresh, hot pasty would be a welcome one for a weary traveller or a hungry worker. The steam rising from the cracks in the crust would be a promise of warmth and sustenance. The smell, a mix of cooked meat, vegetables, and warm dough, would be a magnet for anyone on an empty stomach. The pasty was more than just a meal, it was a lifeline, a bit of comfort you could carry with you. It was a simple, yet ingenious, solution to a basic human need. The act of eating a pasty, standing in the middle of a muddy road, was a deeply practical and satisfying experience. It was the perfect example of how medieval junk food was designed not just for taste, but for survival. And you can almost feel the weight of it in your own hand. The warmth seeping into your cold fingers. It feels a little greasy, a little heavy, and completely, perfectly medieval. As you continue your journey through the medieval marketplace, you notice a distinct, almost overpowering smell, a briny, fishy odour that makes you wrinkle your nose. It leads you to a vendor with a large, bubbling cauldron of fat, and he's dropping small, breaded pieces of fish into it. The sizzle is loud and constant, and he's selling them as fish fritters. In a world where meat could be expensive and hard to come by, freshwater fish was a cheap and readily available source of protein. This was especially true for towns located near rivers and lakes, where a fisherman could bring in a daily catch and sell it fresh, or in this case, fried. A main historical fact is that the consumption of freshwater fish was an absolute necessity for many during the medieval period, especially on religious fasting days when the eating of meat was forbidden. A quirky tidbit is that these fish fritters were often made with a very simple batter of flour and water, sometimes with a bit of ale added for leavening. The fish itself was likely a smaller, bonier variety, like perch or carp, which were abundant but not particularly prized. The vendor would simply cut them into pieces, dunk them in the batter, and fry them until golden brown. This was a perfect way to make a less desirable fish into a quick, hot, and filling meal. The smell, however, was a constant companion, a testament to the fact that these were not caught that morning. The fish vendor is a master of his trade, using a simple wooden stick to pull the fritters from the hot fat and place them on a clean cloth to drain. The sound of the oil bubbling and spitting is a rhythmic counterpoint to the din of the market. Historians still argue whether the oil used for frying was always fresh or if it was reused for days on end, which would have contributed to the distinct and often rancid smell. Given the lack of refrigeration and the high cost of ingredients, it's a safe bet that the fat was recycled as much as possible. This was another example of the kind of corner cutting that was a regular part of the medieval food scene. It wasn't about high-quality dining, it was about getting a meal into a person's belly as quickly and cheaply as possible. You watch as a man with a tired look on his face hands over a coin and gets a handful of the fritters. He blows on them, his breath a cloud in the cool air, and then bites in. He doesn't look particularly happy, but he looks satisfied. This is the reality of medieval junk food. It wasn't a treat, it was a necessity. The fish fritters were a cheap, high-calorie meal that could be eaten on the go, a lifeline for someone who didn't have the time or money for a proper sit-down meal. The taste was probably a bit greasy and a lot fishy, but it was hot and it was filling, and that was all that mattered. The vendor's cry is a simple one. Fish fritters, hot and ready, and it's a cry that's been heard in marketplaces for centuries, a testament to a food that was both a culinary staple and a last resort. The smell of fried fish fades, and a new, more complex aroma begins to take hold. It's not a single scent, but a tapestry of different smells: cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and the sharp, bright scent of pepper. You've come to a section of the market where the flavors of the East are starting to make their presence known. This is a direct result of the growing spice trade, a slow but steady trickle of luxury goods that is beginning to change the face of European cuisine, even at the street level. What was once a simple, local food scene is now being subtly influenced by a global network of trade. A main historical fact is that spices were not just for flavoring food, they were a symbol of status, a display of wealth. The more exotic the spice, the more powerful and rich you were. But a quirky tidbit is that as the trade routes became more established, the prices of some spices began to drop, making them accessible to a wider range of people. Suddenly, a vendor who previously only had access to local herbs like thyme and rosemary could afford to buy a small amount of cinnamon or cloves. This was the beginning of the end for the old, bland diet. Now, that same pepper bread from before could have a hint of cinnamon, and a simple meat patty could have a touch of ginger. Historians still argue whether the increased use of spices in street food was a conscious effort to make the food more appealing or a happy accident of a changing economy. Either way, the result was a subtle but profound shift in the flavor of medieval junk food. You can see a vendor proudly displaying a small, precious bag of what looks like ground cinnamon. He's not selling it by the pound, he's selling a single pinch to a woman who wants to make her honey cakes a little bit special. This small transaction is a sign of a massive change, a shift from a purely local diet to one that is becoming increasingly globalized. The spices weren't just for flavor, they were also used for preservation, a way to keep food from spoiling as quickly. The antimicrobial properties of things like cloves and cinnamon were not understood scientifically, but their effects were certainly noticed. A vendor would add spices to his sausages not just to make them taste better, but to keep them from going bad on a warm day. It was a practical solution to a very real problem. The air around you is suddenly filled with the scent of distant lands, of caravans traveling across deserts and ships sailing across vast oceans. It's a powerful feeling, though, to stand in a muddy medieval market and smell the fragrance of a place you can only dream of. The scents are a kind of storytelling, each one a whisper of a distant land and a long, arduous journey. It's a reminder that even the simplest, cheapest foods have a history that stretches far beyond the town walls. The scents of exotic spices give way to a different, more pungent aroma, that of salt and smoke. You see a vendor with a string of what look like hard, dry fish hanging over a small, smouldering fire. Their skin is cracked and their flesh is shriveled, a testament to the preservation process they've undergone. This is the reality of medieval life and its food, without refrigeration. People had to rely on age-old methods to make food last, and nothing was more crucial than salting and smoking. This wasn't just a way to add flavor, it was a matter of survival, a way to ensure that food could be transported and stored for months on end. A main historical fact is that salt was an incredibly valuable commodity in the Middle Ages. It was a currency in some places and was heavily taxed, and its ability to preserve food made it essential. A quirky tidbit is that the process of smoking food was often done more for its preservative qualities than for its taste. The smoke, from woods like oak or hickory, would contain chemicals that inhibited the growth of bacteria, making the food safe for travel and storage. This is why a lot of medieval junk food would have a very distinct, almost overpowering salty or smoky flavor. You watch as a man buys a piece of a salted fish, and you can see the white crystals of salt clinging to the surface, a sign of its long journey and its even longer shelf life. Historians still argue whether the high intake of salt contributed to health problems like high blood pressure and kidney disease, but for the average person, the risk was worth it. A salted fish or a piece of smoked meat was a guarantee of a meal in a world where food could be scarce. This was the original grab-and-go food, something you could take with you on a long journey without it spoiling. The vendor selling these wares is a master of his craft, knowing just how much salt and smoke to apply to ensure the food lasts. His stall is a testament to the ingenuity of a people who had to work with what they had, using natural processes to overcome the limitations of their technology. The taste of these foods would have been intense, a far cry from the subtle flavors you're used to. The fish would be almost impossibly salty, requiring a long drink of ale or water to wash it down. The smoked meat would have a dense, chewy texture and a flavor that was all smoke and spice. But these were the flavors of survival, the taste of a people who were masters of making things last. The vendor's cry. Salted fish, good for a month, is not just an advertisement, it's a promise, a guarantee of a meal that will not rot. This is a powerful idea in a world where food security was a daily struggle. The very air around his stall feels heavy with the promise of preservation, a tangible sense of safety and preparedness. It's a bit of a tough smell to endure, but it's a smell that tells a story of an entire era. The briny smell of salted fish still lingers. But as you wander, you come across a different kind of stall. This one is simple, just a woman with a large, steaming pot over a low fire. She's selling what she calls pudding, but it's not the sweet, creamy dessert you might be thinking of. This is a thick, glutinous porridge made from grains. A true poor man's pudding. It's a testament to the fact that for many in the medieval period, a meal was about sustenance, not flavor, and this humble dish was a masterclass in making do. A main historical fact is that grain, primarily barley or oats, was the foundation of the medieval diet for the common person. This was a direct result of the feudal system, where serfs often paid their rent in grain and had a limited amount left over for their own consumption. A quirky tidbit is that this pudding wasn't always just a single grain. The cook would often add whatever odds and ends they had, a few vegetables, a bit of dried fruit, or even some leftover breadcrumbs to thicken it and add some flavor. This was the original everything but the kitchen sink recipe, a way to use up every last morsel of food. You can see the woman stirring the pot with a large wooden spoon. The mixture a lumpy, brownish grey. The steam rising from the pot smells earthy and a little bit sour, a direct result of the fermentation of the grain. Historians still argue whether this type of pudding was a food of last resort or a staple that people genuinely enjoyed. The truth is, it was probably both. On a cold day, a bowl of hot grain pudding was a comfort, a simple meal that filled the belly and provided the energy needed to get through a long day of labor. The vendor selling it is a master of her trade, knowing just how to cook the grain so it becomes thick and sticky without burning. Her stall is a beacon of reliability in a chaotic market. You know what you're getting, a simple, cheap, and filling meal. The flavor, you can imagine, would be quite bland. A canvas for whatever a person could add. If they were lucky, they might have a bit of salt, some honey, or a few herbs to mix in. But for most, it was just the simple taste of boiled grain, a flavor that spoke of hard work and a life lived close to the earth. The vendor's cry is soft and low. Hot pudding, get it while it's warm, and it's a cry that has a comforting, familiar ring to it. It's a sound that promises a small, simple moment of rest and nourishment in the middle of a busy day. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food. It's not a treat or an indulgence. It's a matter of survival. A simple dish that has fed generations of people. The rhythmic sound of her spoon scraping against the bottom of the pot is a bit like a lullaby. A soft, soothing noise that feels like home, leaving the lumpy grain pudding behind. You are met with a new set of smells, this time tangy and sour, a scent that speaks of fermentation. You find a stall selling various lumps of what look like curdled milk and soft, white cheeses. This is the world of unpasteurized dairy, a crucial part of the medieval diet, but also a very risky one. Without the modern understanding of bacteria and sanitation, the process of making cheese and curds was a bit of a gamble, a delicious, but potentially dangerous. Roll of the dice. A main historical fact is that raw, unpasteurized milk was a common commodity, and turning it into cheese or curds was a way to make a perishable product last longer. A quirky tidbit is that the process of curdling the milk was often done using a piece of a calf's stomach, which contained the necessary enzymes. This practice, while effective, added another layer of mystery and potential contamination to the final product. You watch as a man samples a piece of cheese from a large wheel, and you can see a thick, dark crust on the outside, a sign of its age and its long journey from the farm to the market. Historians still argue whether the high rate of foodborne illnesses in the medieval period was a result of contaminated dairy products. Given the lack of clean water and the absence of pasteurization, it's a safe bet that many of these products were rife with bacteria. But for the average person, these risks were secondary to the need for a cheap and high-calorie food source. Cheese was a compact, portable meal that could be taken on a journey or eaten as a quick snack. It was a source of protein and fat, a welcome addition to a diet that was often low on both. The vendor selling these cheeses is a master of his trade. Knowing which cheeses are safe to eat and which are best left alone, he likely has a strong stomach and an even stronger immune system. The cheeses themselves would have had a range of flavors, from a mild, fresh cheese that was eaten on the same day it was made to a strong, pungent cheese that had been aged for months. The smell of the stall is a bit overwhelming, a mix of sour milk, aged cheese, and the earthy aroma of the wooden table they are sitting on. But for those who knew the signs of a good cheese, this was a treasure trove. It was a way to get a taste of the farm in the middle of a bustling town, a small piece of the countryside that had been transformed into a durable, portable food. The very idea of eating a cheese that was made with raw milk and an animal's stomach is a bit unsettling, but it speaks to the resourcefulness and the high tolerance for risk that defined the medieval diet. You can almost feel the creamy texture of a fresh curd on your tongue. Its simple, milky flavor a contrast to the complex, aged cheeses around it. It's a taste of history, a simple food that has a lot to say about the people who ate it. The thought of unpasteurized dairy is still on your mind as the atmosphere around you changes. The bustling sounds of the market begin to quiet, and the general clamour is replaced by a sombre hush. You notice that the vendors' stalls are less full, and the faces of the people you pass are drawn and thin. This is the spectre of famine, a recurring nightmare in the medieval world, and it completely reshaped what people considered food. The simple, greasy snacks of the marketplace are now gone, replaced by a desperate search for anything that can be consumed. A main historical fact is that the Great Famine of 1315-1317, caused by an era of bad weather and crop failures, was one of the worst ecological disasters in European history. It led to mass starvation and disease. A quirky tidbit is that during these times, people would turn to what were once considered inedible famine foods. This included things like tree bark, ground up with flour to make a gritty, inedible bread, wild plants and roots that were not normally eaten, and even, in the most dire circumstances, insects and small animals like rats. You watch a person furtively chewing on something, and you can see that it's a handful of wild grasses, their face gaunt with hunger. Historians still argue whether the consumption of these famine foods was a last resort, or if they were, for some, a regular part of their diet. The truth is, people who were already at the edge of starvation had no choice but to eat whatever they could find. This period of time completely redefined the concept of junk food. It wasn't about a greasy snack, it was about sheer survival. The foods people were eating were not only lacking in nutrients, but were often poisonous or indigestible. The very idea of an indulgence was a cruel joke. The marketplace you are in now is a hollowed-out version of its former self, a ghost town of what was once a bustling centre of commerce. The vendors who are still here are selling what little they can, often at exorbitant prices that only a desperate person would pay. The air is heavy with a sense of dread. The happy sounds of the market are gone, replaced by a quiet desperation. The smell of fried food and fresh bread is a distant memory. In its place is the acrid scent of poverty and hunger. This is the dark side of medieval life, the reality that underlay all the talk of feasts and banquets. For the average person, life was a delicate balance, and a single bad harvest could tip the scales from survival to starvation. The foods they were forced to eat were a reflection of that desperation, a collection of things that were truly junk in every sense of the word. They were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a will to survive against all odds, but they were also a reminder of the fragility of that existence. This is a quiet, sobering part of our journey, a moment to reflect on the immense struggle that so many people faced, a struggle that makes even the greasiest sausage seem like a luxury. The grim reality of famine fades, and you're back in a time of at least some abundance, but with a different kind of food. This one is less about flavor and more about durability. A soldier on the road, or a traveling merchant, would have a satchel full of something that looks less like food and more like a piece of wood. It's called hardtack, and it's the medieval equivalent of an energy bar, a hard, dense biscuit made from flour, water, and sometimes a bit of salt. It's unappetizing, almost inedible without being soaked in liquid. But it was essential for long journeys and military campaigns. It was a lifeline in a world without Tupperware or Ziploc bags. A main historical fact is that hardtack was baked multiple times to remove all moisture, a process that made it nearly immune to mold and pests. A quirky tidbit is that soldiers would often complain that their hardtack was so hard they had to smash it with a rock or a rifle butt to eat it. You watch a soldier take a piece out of his bag, a small, square biscuit, and he dips it into a cup of ale, waiting for it to soften before he attempts to chew it. It's a slow and deliberate process, one that speaks to the patience and resilience required for a life on the road. Historians still argue whether hardtack was a food of last resort or a necessary part of a soldier's or sailor's diet. The truth is, it was both. It was a guaranteed meal in a situation where fresh food was impossible to come by. It wasn't delicious, and it certainly wasn't a treat, but it was reliable. The vendor who made this would have been a specialist, a baker who understood the science of drying and preservation. He wouldn't have a stall in the market. He would likely have a contract with the local army or a merchant guild. The taste, you can imagine, would be incredibly bland, a simple flavor of baked flour and salt. But the texture would be the real challenge, a dry, hard, unyielding thing that required effort just to get down your throat. It was the antithesis of all the greasy, savory, and sweet junk foods we've talked about. This was food as pure function, a fuel source with no frills. It was the ultimate fast food for a long-distance journey. The sound it would make as you bit into it, or rather, as you tried to bite into it, would be a dry, brittle crunch, a sound that says, "This is not for pleasure, this is for survival." It's a sobering thought, a reminder that the line between sustenance and enjoyment was often a very wide one, and for many, the concept of enjoyment simply didn't exist. The weight of that small biscuit in your mind's eye feels heavy with the promise of a long, difficult journey, leaving the hardtack behind. You find yourself at the heart of the medieval town's economy, the bread market. Here, the air is filled with a different kind of aroma, a less refined, earthier smell of flour and yeast. A long line of people are waiting to buy their daily bread from a series of bakers who have set up their stalls. This isn't the fluffy, artisanal loaf you're used to. This is the sustenance of the masses, and its quality is a constant source of struggle and deception. A main historical fact is that bread was the absolute cornerstone of the medieval diet, accounting for a huge portion of a person's daily calorie intake. The quality of your bread was often a direct indicator of your social status. The wealthy ate fine, white loaves made from sifted wheat flour, while the poor had dark, coarse bread made from barley, rye, or even a mix of ground-up beans and peas. A quirky tidbit is that bakers would often add fillers to their loaves to make them cheaper and heavier. This could include anything from sawdust and chalk to ground peas and beans. And this practice was so common that most towns had a pillory of the baker, a public punishment for bakers who cheated their customers by selling underweight or adulterated loaves. You can see a baker holding up his loaf, and it looks suspiciously heavy, a telltale sign of a shady practice. Historians still argue whether the practice of bread adulteration was a result of a lack of quality control or a deliberate attempt to exploit the poor. The truth is, it was likely a bit of both. The high demand for cheap bread meant that bakers were under pressure to cut corners, and a lack of regulation meant they often got away with it. The customer, if they were lucky, would only get a loaf that was a bit coarse and gritty. If they were unlucky, they could get a loaf that was barely digestible and could even make them sick. The sound of the bread market is a low hum of chatter, punctuated by the occasional angry shout of a customer who feels they have been cheated. The vendors, in their simple linen clothes, are masters of their trade, able to tell a customer what they want to hear while selling them a less-than-perfect product. This is the reality of the food chain in the medieval world. It's a place of scarcity and a constant struggle for an advantage. And even the most basic of foods is subject to fraud. The feel of a fresh loaf in your hands, heavy and warm, would be a comfort. But the knowledge that it might contain something other than flour and water is a sobering thought. The simple, humble loaf of bread is a symbol of both survival and deceit, a perfect example of the complexities of medieval life. As you leave the dubious bread market, a new, more comforting smell catches your attention, the sweet, nutty aroma of something roasting over an open fire. You find a vendor on a street corner, a brazier of glowing coals in front of him, and he's stirring a pan of dark, glossy chestnuts. This is the simple pleasure of roasted chestnuts, a classic winter street staple that has endured for centuries in a world of often questionable food. This was a treat you could trust, a simple, unadulterated snack that provided warmth and a familiar flavor. A main historical fact is that chestnuts were a vital food source in many parts of Europe, especially in the south, where they were often ground into flour and used as a substitute for grain. A quirky tidbit is that the process of roasting the chestnuts was an art form. The vendor had to know exactly when to pull them from the heat to ensure they were cooked through but not burned, and a quick score on the shell before roasting was essential to prevent them from exploding. You watch as the vendor, his hands stained from the dark shells, expertly pulls a handful from the fire and places them in a small paper cone he has fashioned from a scrap of parchment. The steam rises from them, a visual promise of warmth and comfort. Historians still argue whether the practice of selling roasted chestnuts was a social custom or a necessary part of the seasonal diet. The truth is, it was probably both. On a cold winter's day, a handful of warm chestnuts was a cheap and effective way to get a quick burst of calories and to warm your hands. The vendor selling them was a beacon of warmth in the cold, a provider of a simple, comforting treat that was a welcome change from the tough, unyielding hardtack and the questionable sausages. The sound of the chestnuts crackling in the fire is a soft, rhythmic sound, a lullaby of the street. It's a sound that promises a small moment of peace and warmth in a world that could often be cold and harsh. The feeling of the hot chestnuts in your hands, their shells smooth and their insides soft and floury, is a simple pleasure that transcends time. It's a taste of history that is still with us today, a reminder that some of the best foods are the simplest. The warmth of the roasted chestnuts fades, and you find yourself in front of a new stall. Here, the aroma is sharp and vinegary, a smell that makes your nose tingle. The vendor has a large, open barrel, and inside, floating in a dark, murky liquid, are what look like hard-boiled eggs. These are pickled eggs, and they represent a crucial part of the medieval food system, the art of preservation. In an era without refrigeration, pickling was a common method to make perishable foods, like eggs, last for weeks or even months. A main historical fact is that eggs were abundant in the spring and summer, but scarce in the winter. Pickling was a way to store the surplus, ensuring a source of protein and fat during the colder months. A quirky tidbit is that the pickling liquid wasn't just vinegar, it was often a mix of ale, wine, and water, with a generous amount of salt and various spices like pepper and cloves. This made the eggs not just preserved but also flavorful, a welcome change from the otherwise bland diet. You watch as the vendor, a woman with strong, capable hands, uses a slotted wooden spoon to pull a handful of the eggs from the barrel. They are stained a yellowish brown from the liquid, a sign of their long immersion. Historians still argue whether the practice of pickling eggs was a necessity or a deliberate culinary choice. The truth is, it was probably both. While the preservation aspect was key, the tangy, spicy flavor of the pickled egg would have been a treat, a burst of flavor in a world of simple tastes for a traveler or a laborer. A pickled egg was a perfect snack. It was portable, didn't spoil, and provided a good amount of energy. The vendor's stall is simple, just the barrel and a small table. But it's a masterclass in practicality. She knows her customers are looking for something they can trust, and a pickled egg is exactly that. The taste, you can imagine, would be incredibly pungent and sour, a far cry from a fresh egg, but it was a taste that spoke of foresight and preparation, a taste that said, "I have food for the winter." The vendor's cry. Pickled eggs, good to eat and long to keep, is not just a marketing slogan, it's a promise of food security. This is the essence of medieval junk food. It wasn't about instant gratification, it was about survival. And the pickled egg is a perfect example of how a simple food could be transformed into a durable, portable meal. The feeling of that cold, hard egg in your hand, its vinegary smell sharp in the cool air, is a tangible link to a world that was all about making do with what you had. The sharp, vinegary scent of pickled eggs fades, replaced by a new, more savory aroma. It's the smell of roasting meat, but on a much smaller scale. You see a vendor with a simple spit over a small fire, and on it, impaled on a stick, are a dozen tiny, roasted birds. This is the surprisingly common medieval street food of roasted small birds, a treat that was both a culinary delicacy and a practical source of protein. In a world with a vast array of wildlife, trapping and roasting small birds like larks, sparrows, or finches was a simple and effective way to get a quick, hot meal. A main historical fact is that hunting and trapping small birds was a common practice for peasants and commoners, as it didn't require a noble's permission or expensive equipment. A quirky tidbit is that these birds were often eaten whole, bones and all, as a source of calcium. The vendor would simply clean the bird, skewer it, and roast it over the fire until the skin was crispy and the meat was cooked through. You can see the vendor, a young boy with a sharp eye, turning the spit with a practiced hand. The birds are small, no bigger than your fist. But they are a testament to the resourcefulness of a people who knew how to make a meal out of whatever nature provided. Historians still argue whether the practice of eating small birds was a last resort for the poor or a genuine culinary tradition. The truth is, it was likely both. While a roasted swan was a luxury for the rich, a roasted lark was a treat for the common person. It was a simple, yet satisfying meal that could be eaten on the go, a rare chance to have a taste of fresh, roasted meat without the expense of a whole chicken or a joint of pork. The sound of the fat sizzling and dripping into the fire is a soft, gentle hiss, a sound that promises a warm and satisfying meal. The vendor's cry, "Roasted birds, hot from the spit," is a simple one, but it's a cry that speaks to a very real need for protein and warmth. This is the essence of medieval junk food. It's not about what is the most delicious, but what is the most practical and accessible. The roasted bird is a perfect example of this, a simple, small creature that was transformed into a quick, hot, and filling meal. The feeling of that hot stick in your hand, with the tiny, crispy bird on the end, is a tangible link to a world that was all about making do with what you had. The delicate, savory smell of the roasted bird is a welcome change from the more pungent aromas of the market, a small moment of culinary grace in a world that was often quite graceless. The smell of roasted birds dissipates, replaced by the hearty, comforting aroma of a thick, vegetable-based stew. You see a woman with a massive, blackened cauldron hanging over a fire, and she's serving a thick, brownish concoction into wooden bowls. She calls it pottage. This was the all-in-one peasant's bowl, a staple of the medieval diet, and it was the ultimate in practical, economical eating. It was a single dish that combined everything a person needed for a hearty, filling meal, a testament to the fact that for many, cooking was less about art and more about survival. A main historical fact is that pottage was the most common meal for the vast majority of the population. It was so ubiquitous that the word pottage was often synonymous with dinner or a meal. A quirky tidbit is that pottage was often left to simmer for days on end, with new ingredients being added as they became available. This created a complex, multi-layered flavor profile, with the oldest ingredients at the bottom and the newest on top. You can almost see the different layers of vegetables, grains, and herbs that have been added over time. This continuous simmering meant that the pottage was always hot and ready, a perfect solution for a family with staggered meal times. Historians still argue whether the practice of eating pottage was a matter of tradition or a simple result of a lack of a better cooking method. The truth is, it was a genius solution to the problem of a limited food supply and a lack of cooking utensils. With just one pot and a fire, a family could create a meal that was both nutritious and filling. The ingredients were a mix of whatever was available: peas, beans, cabbage, onions, and whatever leftover scraps of meat or bone could be added for flavor. The result was a thick, comforting stew that provided a much-needed burst of calories and nutrients. The woman serving it is a master of her trade, knowing just how to stir the pottage to prevent it from burning and how to make a single pot last for days. The sound of her ladle scraping against the side of the cauldron is a soft, rhythmic clank. A sound that has echoed through medieval kitchens for centuries. It's a sound that promises warmth, sustenance, and a moment of rest. The pottage itself is a visual testament to its history, a thick, lumpy, and slightly mysterious stew that tells the story of a family's diet over the course of a week. It's the ultimate medieval junk food, not a treat, not an indulgence, but a simple, practical, and resilient meal that has fed generations. The steam rising from the bowl you hold in your mind's eye is warm against your face, a comforting reminder of a simple, yet nourishing, past. The thick, humble pottage gives way to a new sight, a vendor with a small iron plate held over a fire. The plate is covered in intricate carvings, and as he pours a thin batter onto it, the metal sizzles and a beautiful, patterned cake takes shape. He's making wafers and waffles. And these were the original medieval version of a cookie or a fancy biscuit, a simple treat made a little bit special by the addition of a decorative touch. While pottage was for survival, these were for pleasure, a small luxury that was still within reach for the common person. A main historical fact is that the iron plates used to make these wafers were often passed down through generations. They were a prized possession and were a sign of a professional wafer maker. A quirky tidbit is that the patterns on the irons were often religious in nature, depicting saints, crosses, or other holy symbols. This was a way to add a bit of spiritual significance to a simple treat. You can see the vendor press the two sides of the iron together, and when he opens it, a thin, crispy, beautifully patterned wafer is revealed. It's a testament to the artistry that was possible even at the street level. Historians still argue whether these wafers were more often savory than sweet, while the sweet version, made with honey and spices, was a popular treat. Some were made with cheese or herbs and were eaten as a savory snack. The truth is, the wafer iron was a versatile tool, and the vendor would have used it to make whatever his customers wanted. The sound of the iron sizzling and the delicate crunch of the finished wafer are a contrast to the heavy, earthy sounds of the rest of the market. It's a sound that promises a light, crispy, and elegant treat, the vendors cry. Wafers, fresh and fine, is a promise of a different kind of food. This isn't about filling your stomach, it's about delighting your senses. The feeling of that delicate, crisp wafer in your hands, its surface patterned with a beautiful design, is a reminder that even in a world of hardship, there was still room for beauty and artistry. It's a small, sweet piece of history that shows us that the desire for a beautiful and delicious treat is a human constant, one that has been with us for centuries. The crispness of the wafers gives way to a new, less appetizing smell. It's the sour, slightly rancid aroma of food that has been cooked once and is now being reheated. You see a vendor with a small brazier, and he's reheating what looks like a mix of leftover meat and vegetables. This is the world of medieval leftovers, a common and often risky practice of reheating and reselling food. A testament to the fact that nothing was wasted. This was a direct result of the lack of refrigeration and the need to get every last bit of value out of a product. A main historical fact is that reheating food was a standard practice in a world without modern preservation methods. It was a way to make a meal last for an extra day or two. A quirky tidbit is that the vendors would often add a liberal amount of spices and sauce to the reheated food to mask the taste of it. The result was a flavorful, but often mysterious, concoction. You watch as a man buys a bowl of the reheated stew, and you can see a thick layer of grease on the surface, a sign that this food has been around for a while. Historians still argue whether the practice of reheating food was more dangerous than simply eating the food as a leftover. Given the lack of sanitation, both were a gamble, but for the vendor, it was a way to make a bit of extra money. He could sell the food for a fraction of the cost of a fresh meal, making it accessible to those who were the most desperate. The sound of the food sizzling in the pan is a soft, gentle hiss, a sound that promises a warm meal, but also one that carries with it a sense of risk. The vendor's cry is a low hum. Hot food, cheap and ready, and it's a cry that speaks to the desperation of a people who were willing to take a risk for a warm meal. The lingering scent of yesterday's food fades, and you find yourself in front of a series of stalls that are clean, orderly, and well-maintained. This is the domain of the medieval Bakers' Guild. While we've seen the shady side of bread, this is the official, sanctioned side. The guild was a powerful force in the medieval town, a group of bakers who banded together to control the quality, price, and production of bread. This was a crucial part of the food system, a way to ensure that at least some of the food being sold was of a consistent quality. A main historical fact is that the Bakers' Guild was one of the most powerful and influential guilds in any town. They had the power to set prices and regulations, and they were often given a monopoly on bread production. A quirky tidbit is that the famous baker's dozen came from a medieval law. To avoid being accused of cheating their customers by selling an underweight loaf, bakers would often throw in an extra loaf to be safe, thus giving 13 instead of 12. You watch as a baker, a man with a clean white apron and a serious look on his face, carefully weighs a loaf of bread on a small scale. He is taking his craft seriously. Historians still argue whether the guilds were a force for good or evil. While they provided a level of quality control and stability, they also had a stranglehold on the market, making it difficult for independent bakers to compete. The guild members were also more likely to cater to the wealthy, who could afford their high-quality loaves, while the poor were often left to fend for themselves with the shady street vendors. The sound of the bakery is a quiet, orderly hum, a contrast to the chaos of the rest of the market. The smell is a clean, fresh aroma of baked flour and yeast, a smell that promises a wholesome and trustworthy meal. This is a reminder that even in the chaotic medieval world, there was a system, a set of rules that governed the production of the most basic of all foods. Leaving the orderly world of the Bakers' Guild, you find yourself at a stall that is a complete contrast. It's a small, simple table, but on it are small, elegant confections. They are white and sugary, and they sparkle in the light. This is the world of refined sugar, and it represents a massive divide between the rich and the poor. For the wealthy, sugar was not just a sweetener, it was a symbol of their wealth, a display of their power and their connection to the global spice trade. A main historical fact is that refined sugar was so expensive that it was often kept in a locked chest and only used for special occasions. It was a luxury item that only a small percentage of the population could afford. A quirky tidbit is that sugar was often moulded into elaborate shapes, like castles, animals, or even coats of arms. To be used as a centerpiece at a banquet, these sugary sculptures were a sign of immense wealth and were often too beautiful to eat. You watch as a nobleman's servant buys a small, ornate sugar plum, and he carefully places it in a silk-lined box. Historians still argue whether the high demand for sugar was a result of its taste or its status as a luxury good. The truth is, it was likely both. The taste of pure, refined sugar was a revelation in a world that was used to the earthy, cloying sweetness of honey and molasses. But the real appeal was its rarity. To be able to sweeten your food with pure sugar was a statement, a way to show the world that you had money and power. The smell of the stall is a clean, sweet aroma, a stark contrast to the rough, earthy smells of the rest of the market. This is the ultimate junk food for the medieval elite, a rare and precious indulgence that was a world away from the greasy sausages and lumpy pottage of the common person. The sweet scent of refined sugar fades, and you are met with the yeasty, malty aroma of a brewing house. This isn't a rowdy alehouse, it's a quiet, orderly place. This is a monastery's brewing house, and it represents a crucial but often overlooked part of the medieval food and drink scene. Monasteries were not just places of worship, they were also centres of agriculture and production, and they played a vital role in providing food and drink to the local community. A main historical fact is that monasteries were some of the most advanced producers of beer and ale in the Middle Ages. They had access to better ingredients and a more consistent brewing process, making their ale superior in quality. A quirky tidbit is that the monks would often brew different strengths of ale for different purposes. The strongest, or abbey ale, was for the monks themselves, a medium-strength ale was for guests, and a very low-alcohol small beer was for the poor and the children. You can see the monks at work, their faces calm and focused as they stir a large wooden vat of fermenting ale. The process is one of both science and art, a tradition that has been passed down for centuries. Historians still argue whether the monastery's brewing was a form of charity or a source of income. The truth is, it was likely both. By providing high-quality, safe-to-drink ale, the monasteries were performing a public service, but they also sold their ale, and the profits were used to support the monastery and its charitable works. The sound of the brewing house is a low, gentle bubbling, a sound that promises a clean, safe, and delicious drink. The smell is a rich, malty aroma, a far cry from the sour, yeasty smell of the street vendor's ale. This is a reminder that in the medieval world, even the most basic of needs could be met with a level of care and expertise that was often surprising. The monastery's ale was a different kind of junk food, not a greasy snack, but a reliable, wholesome drink that was a vital part of the medieval diet. Leaving the quiet monastery behind, you find yourself on a long, dusty road. The air is dry and the sun is hot, and you are surrounded by travellers. This is the world of the pilgrim's diet, a life of eating on the road where junk food was a matter of necessity, not choice. This was a diet of limited, often unappetizing, options, a stark contrast to the bustle of the town marketplace. For the pilgrim, a meal was about survival, not pleasure. A main historical fact is that pilgrims and other travellers would carry a small satchel with a few essential foods. This would often include hardtack, dried salted fish, and a piece of cheese. A quirky tidbit is that they would often rely on the kindness of strangers and the charity of monasteries for a hot meal. But on the long stretches of road between towns, they were on their own. You can see a group of pilgrims gathered around a small fire, and they are eating a simple meal of bread and cheese. The bread is hard and dry, and the cheese is a bit oily, a result of the heat. Historians still argue whether the pilgrim's diet was a form of self-sacrifice or a simple necessity. The truth is, it was likely both. The journey itself was an act of faith, and the hardship of the diet was a part of that. But it was also a reflection of the limitations of travel in the medieval world. There were no convenience stores or fast food restaurants. You had to bring your own food, and it had to be durable. The sound of their meal is a quiet one, a soft crunching of hard bread and a low hum of conversation. The smell is a mix of stale bread, aged cheese, and wood smoke. It's a smell that speaks of a long and difficult journey. A journey that was undertaken with a simple and unyielding faith. The feeling of that dry, hard bread in your hands, its taste a bit bland and gritty, is a tangible link to a world where a meal was a blessing, no matter how humble. The image of the weary pilgrim on the road fades, and you find yourself in front of a rare sight, a permanent structure that isn't a house or a church, but a place for public dining. This is the medieval fast food restaurant, a rudimentary establishment that provided simple, hot meals for travellers and locals alike. It was a far cry from a modern-day diner, but it was a crucial part of the urban landscape, a place where a person could get a meal without the hassle of a street vendor or the formality of an alehouse. A main historical fact is that these establishments were often called cookshops or hospitals in the sense of providing hospitality. They were run by a cook who specialized in a few simple dishes, usually stews, pies, or roasted meats. A quirky tidbit is that these cookshops were often located near a town gate or a busy road, a convenient stop for travellers who had just arrived or were about to depart. You can see the cook, a large man with a flour-dusted apron, tending to a huge cauldron of stew. The smell is a mix of meat, vegetables, and a whole lot of pepper. Historians still argue whether these cookshops were a sign of a growing middle class or a simple necessity for a transient population. The truth is, they were likely both. For a traveller, the cookshop offered a reliable, if not spectacular, meal. For a local, it was a place to grab a quick bite when they didn't have time to cook. The sound of the cookshop is a low hum of activity. The clatter of wooden spoons and the sizzling of meat. It's a sound that promises a warm, ready meal, a simple luxury in a world where every meal was a project. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a service, a place where you could buy a hot meal for a fair price without any fuss. The taste of that simple stew, hot and savoury, would have been a moment of pure comfort, a reminder that even on the road there was a place you could find a little bit of home. Leaving the cookshop behind, you find yourself at a small, unassuming stall where a woman is serving a dark, cloudy liquid from a large wooden cask. This isn't ale, not in the way you've come to know it. This is small beer and grute, and they represent the reality of medieval drink. A world where water was a dangerous gamble and fermented beverages were a safer, more reliable alternative. These weren't just for pleasure, they were for hydration, and they were a crucial part of the daily diet for everyone, from children to adults. A main historical fact is that small beer was a very low alcohol brew, often made from the second or third mashing of the grain. It was weak enough to be drunk all day without causing intoxication and was a much safer alternative to the contaminated water from rivers and wells. A quirky tidbit is that before hops became the standard bittering agent, ale was often flavoured with a mix of herbs, roots, and spices called grute. This could include anything from bog myrtle to yarrow, giving each brew a unique and often medicinal flavour. You watch as a thirsty labourer buys a wooden mug of small beer, and the liquid is dark and murky, a testament to its simple brewing process. Historians still argue whether the widespread consumption of small beer and gruit was a matter of taste or a simple necessity born of a lack of clean water. The truth is, it was a bit of both. The taste of grute was often an acquired one, but the safety of the drink was a non-negotiable. The vendor, an older woman with a kind face, is a master of her trade. She knows that she is providing more than just a drink. She is providing a source of hydration that won't make her customers sick. The sound of the small beer being poured into the mug is a soft, gentle splash, a sound that promises refreshment and safety. The smell is an earthy, herbal aroma, a bit of a departure from the sweet, malty smell of a hop-based ale. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a life-saving necessity. A simple drink that was a cornerstone of public health. The taste of herbal grute on your tongue fades, replaced by a new, more unsettling sensation, that of suspicion. You find yourself in front of a vendor selling what he calls honey cakes. But as you get closer, you see that the cakes look a bit too dark and a bit too heavy. This is the world of medieval food scams and adulteration, a common practice of adding non-food items to products to bulk them up, make them cheaper, and increase profits. This was a dark and seedy side of the street food scene, a constant struggle between the buyer and the seller. A main historical fact is that food adulteration was so common that most towns had laws against it, and the punishments were often harsh, ranging from public shaming to fines and even time in the pillory. A quirky tidbit is that one of the most common scams was to add sand or dirt to flour to increase its weight, a practice that made the resulting bread gritty and difficult to eat. You can almost feel the grit in your mouth as you look at the dark cakes. The vendor, a man with shifty eyes, avoids eye contact as he sells his wares. He knows what he is doing is wrong, but the temptation of a quick profit is too great. Historians still argue whether the practice of food adulteration was a result of a lack of regulation or a simple reflection of a society that was less concerned with consumer protection. The truth is, it was a bit of both. The buyer had to be savvy, a master of sniffing out a scam, and the seller had to be just a little bit more clever. The sound of the market is a low hum of chatter, but now it is punctuated by a new sound, the sharp, angry shout of a customer who feels they have been cheated. The smell of the stall is a bit off, a mix of honey and something vaguely earthy, a smell that tells you that this is not a product you can trust. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a risk, a simple transaction that could lead to a very unpleasant surprise. It's a reminder that in a world without consumer protection, every purchase was a gamble. The taste of suspicion lingers as you move through the bustling market. But now you are hearing something new, a sound that is both a part of the chaos and a guide through it. It's a chorus of shouts and cries, each one a unique song, a distinctive call used by the street vendors to advertise their wares. This was the medieval version of a jingle or a billboard, a way to attract customers in a world without modern marketing. It was a loud, often shrill, form of communication, a constant soundtrack to daily life. A main historical fact is that each vendor had a specific cry that they would use to announce their product. This cry was often a simple rhyme or a catchy phrase that made it easy for people to identify what was being sold. Even from a distance, a quirky tidbit is that some vendors were so skilled at their cries that they became famous throughout the town. Their voices a familiar part of the urban soundscape. You can hear a woman's voice rising above the din. Hot pies, come get your pies, and her voice has a musical, lilting quality that makes you want to follow it. Historians still argue whether these cries were a sign of a vibrant, commercial culture or a necessary evil in a world without mass media. The truth is, they were likely both. For the vendor, the cry was a vital tool for survival, a way to compete in a crowded market. For the customer, it was a way to navigate that market, a system of audio cues that told them where to find what they were looking for. The sound of the market is a chaotic symphony of human voices, each one a small story, a testament to the fact that even the most basic of needs was a matter of communication and commerce. The very air around you is thick with the stories of the street, each one a whisper of a product, a promise of a meal. This is the heart of the medieval town, a place where business was not just conducted, it was shouted. The chorus of vendors' cries fades, replaced by a new, unexpected sound, the rhythmic clang of a hammer on an anvil. You find yourself standing outside a blacksmith's forge, and the air is thick with the smell of scorched metal and coal smoke. But there's another smell, a savoury one, and you notice a small, makeshift stand next to the forge where the blacksmith himself is selling what looks like sausages and grilled meat. This is a strange but surprisingly common phenomenon, the leaky cauldron, or the blacksmith's food. Blacksmiths often had a fire going all day, and it was a simple matter to use the heat to cook food for themselves and for passing customers. A main historical fact is that blacksmiths and other artisans who worked with fire were often unofficial food providers. Their constant access to heat and their skill with metal made them natural cooks. A quirky tidbit is that the food cooked in the blacksmith's forge would often have a smoky, metallic taste, a direct result of being cooked over a fire used for shaping iron. You watch as the blacksmith, his hands black with soot, hands a customer a skewer of what looks like mystery meat. The customer doesn't seem to mind the soot. Historians still argue whether the blacksmith's food was a last resort for hungry travelers or if it was a genuine convenience. The truth is, it was likely both. For a traveler, the sight of a warm fire and the smell of hot food would have been a welcome one. And for the blacksmith, it was a way to make a little extra money on the side. The sound of the hammer on the anvil is a loud, rhythmic beat, a sound that is both a symbol of labor and a promise of a hot meal. The food is simple, unadorned, and a little bit greasy, a perfect example of a pragmatic and resourceful approach to eating on the go. This is a raw, unfiltered look at medieval junk food, cooked by a person who was a master of a different craft, using the tools of his trade to feed the people around him. The very idea of it feels a little bit rough, a little bit dangerous, and entirely, authentically medieval. The smoky, metallic smell of the blacksmith's forge fades, and a new, more festive atmosphere takes over. The air is filled with the sound of music and laughter, and the streets are decorated with ribbons and banners. This is a festival, and it brings with it a different kind of food, a more elaborate but still junk food experience. These are not the daily staples of survival, they are special occasion eats, a chance to indulge in something a little more luxurious. A main historical fact is that festivals, whether religious or secular, were a crucial part of the medieval calendar. They were a time to celebrate, to relax, and to eat food that you wouldn't normally get. A quirky tidbit is that a common festival food was a roast on a spit, which could be anything from a whole pig to a sheep or a goose. The meat would be roasted over a large fire, and vendors would sell chunks of it to the crowd. This was a rare chance for a common person to eat a large piece of roasted meat. a taste of what the nobles enjoyed every day. You can see a huge, glistening pig turning slowly on a spit, and the smell of the roasting meat is absolutely intoxicating. Historians still argue whether the food at these festivals was truly a luxury for the poor, or if it was just a temporary escape from their otherwise meagre diet. The truth is, it was a bit of both. The food was more elaborate, but it was still junk in the sense that it was meant to be eaten on the go, without cutlery or plates. It was a communal experience, a chance to share a meal with your neighbours and to be a part of something bigger. The sound of the festival is a joyous one, a mix of music, laughter, and the sizzle of roasting meat, the taste of that hot, savoury meat, a little bit greasy and a lot delicious, would have been a moment of pure bliss. It's a reminder that even in a world of hardship, there was still room for celebration and indulgence. The festive atmosphere of the street fades, and you are transported to a quiet, scholarly world. You are in a library or a scriptorium, and you are looking at a beautifully illuminated manuscript, but this isn't a holy text, it's a cookbook. This is the world of the medieval cookbook. And it tells a very different story from the one we have been experiencing on the street. These cookbooks were not for the common person, they were for the wealthy elite. And they reveal a world of culinary complexity and opulence that was a stark contrast to the simple, practical food of the masses. A main historical fact is that the surviving medieval cookbooks, like the Forme of Curie or Le Viandier, are almost exclusively a record of the food of the nobility. They contain recipes for elaborate dishes like roasted swans, gilded peacocks, and jellies made from exotic spices. A quirky tidbit is that many of these recipes are incredibly vague by modern standards, often assuming the cook had a great deal of prior knowledge. They would use phrases like a good handful or cook until it seems right, a testament to the fact that cooking was an art form passed down through apprenticeship, not a science to be learned from a book. You can see the intricate lettering and the beautiful drawings of various animals and dishes. This isn't just a book of recipes, it's a work of art. Historians still argue whether these cookbooks were used as a practical guide or as a way for a lord to display his wealth and knowledge. The truth is, it was likely both. A good cook was a prized possession, and a good cookbook was a way to train that cook and to record the family's culinary traditions. The very existence of these books tells us a lot about the culture of the medieval elite. They were not just concerned with filling their stomachs, they were concerned with displaying their status and their power through their food. The dishes in these books were not junk food, they were a form of edible art, a collection of ingredients that were rare, expensive, and often difficult to acquire. The smell of the parchment and the faint scent of ink are a reminder that the world of food was just as divided by class as everything else in the medieval world. The scholarly world of the cookbook fades, and you are plunged into a world of quiet and despair. The streets are empty, and a strange silence has fallen over the town. This is the aftermath of a great plague, and it completely reshaped the way people lived and, most importantly, the way they ate. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the mid-14th century, didn't just kill a third of the population, it disrupted the entire food production system and changed eating habits forever. A main historical fact is that the massive death toll of the plague led to a severe labour shortage. With fewer people to work the land, food production plummeted, but at the same time, the cost of labour skyrocketed. This meant that for the survivors, wages increased, and they could afford to buy more and better food than they could before the plague. A quirky tidbit is that after the plague, many people began to eat more meat. With fewer people to feed, the price of meat became more affordable, and many peasants who had previously subsisted on pottage and bread could now afford to eat meat on a more regular basis. You can see a family, their faces still etched with grief, sitting at a simple wooden table, and they are eating a piece of roasted chicken, a luxury they never could have afforded before the plague. Historians still argue whether the changes in diet after the plague were a direct result of economic shifts or a psychological change. The truth is, it was likely a bit of both. The survivors were now living in a world of greater opportunity, and they used that opportunity to improve their lives in any way they could, and that included their diet. The air is still and sombre, but there is a strange sense of hope in it, a feeling that a new world is being born from the ashes of the old. The smell of the roasted chicken is a sign of that new world, a smell that promises a future that is a little bit brighter, a little bit more hopeful. This is the ultimate example of a historical event reshaping something as fundamental as what we eat. The Black Death was a tragedy, but it also opened the door to a new culinary reality for the survivors. The quiet solemnity of the plague's aftermath is broken by a vibrant burst of colour and a new, exotic scent. You are at a spice merchant's stall, and the air is thick with the aroma of cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and, most importantly, saffron. This is the world where food becomes a canvas for artistry and a display of wealth. A world where a simple spice can be a symbol of status and power. Saffron, with its deep red-gold colour and its complex flavour, was the ultimate culinary status symbol. A main historical fact is that saffron was one of the most expensive and highly prized spices in the medieval world. Often more valuable than gold by weight, it was a luxury item that was exclusively for the wealthy. And it was used to colour food and drink a beautiful golden yellow. This was not just for taste. It was a way to make a dish visually stunning and to show your guests that you had the money to spare. A quirky tidbit is that saffron was often used in medicine and as a dye for clothing, but its most iconic use was in food, where a single thread could transform a dish. You can see a cook in a wealthy household carefully dropping a few threads of saffron into a pot of stew, turning it a vibrant yellow. The result is a dish that is both delicious and a visual feast. Historians still argue whether the use of spices like saffron was a result of a culinary trend or a simple need to display wealth. The truth is, it was likely both. The taste of saffron is unique and complex, but its real power was in its colour and its cost. To serve a dish coloured with saffron was a way to say, "I am rich, and I have access to the most exotic and expensive goods in the world." The smell of the spice stall is a powerful one, a mix of sweet, savoury, and floral scents that are a world away from the simple, earthy smells of the common person's food. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food for the elite, a dish that was not about sustenance but about pure, unadulterated luxury. The very idea of it feels a little bit over the top, a little bit excessive, and entirely, authentically medieval. The heady scent of saffron fades, and you are back in the thick of it all. You are in the heart of a medieval market. But this time, you are seeing it with new eyes, taking in the full sensory experience. This is not just a place to buy food, it's a sensory overload, a whirlwind of sights, sounds, and smells that tells the story of an entire society. The sheer chaos and vibrancy of it all are both overwhelming and exhilarating. A main historical fact is that medieval markets were the social and economic hub of a town. They were where people came not just to buy and sell, but to socialize, to hear the latest news, and to be a part of the world. A quirky tidbit is that the markets were often divided into different sections, with each type of vendor having their own designated area. This was a form of early urban planning, a way to keep the chaos a little bit more organized. You can see the different sections now, the noisy fishmongers, the serious bakers, the sweet-smelling spice merchants, and the greasy, smoky street vendors, each with their own unique atmosphere. Historians still argue whether the medieval market was a place of opportunity or a place of exploitation. The truth is, it was likely both. For the vendor, it was a chance to make a living, and for the customer, it was a chance to get a meal, but it was also a place where a person could be cheated, a place where the rich and the poor rubbed shoulders, and a place where a person's social status was on full display. The sound of the market is a chaotic symphony of human voices, the bleating of animals, the clatter of wood on wood, and the sizzle of food on the fire. The smells are a mix of everything we've experienced, the sweetness of honey, the pungency of old cheese, the aroma of roasting meat, and the ever-present smell of unwashed bodies and muddy streets. This is the heart of the medieval world, a place that is both a beautiful mess and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The very air you breathe feels alive with 1,000 different stories. The cacophony of the market begins to fade, and a single, sweeter smell takes center stage. It's the familiar aroma of honey, but now you are seeing it in its most basic and enduring form. You are looking at a vendor selling simple, dark cakes, and he calls them honey cakes. This is a sweet treat that predates the medieval era, a simple dessert that has stood the test of time, and it tells a story of a long history of human affection for all things sweet. A main historical fact is that honey cakes were a staple of ancient diets, enjoyed by the Romans and Greeks, and they continued to be popular throughout the Middle Ages. They were a simple combination of flour, honey, and sometimes spices, and they were a way to get a quick burst of energy and a moment of pleasure. A quirky tidbit is that honey cakes were often given as gifts on special occasions, a sign of affection and good fortune. They were a simple, but meaningful, way to celebrate. You can see the vendor, an old man with a kind smile, handing a child a small honey cake. The child's eyes light up, and the simple act is a reminder that some of the best foods are the ones that are shared. Historians still argue whether the enduring popularity of honey cakes was a result of their simple ingredients or their deep cultural significance. The truth is, it was likely both. The cakes were easy to make and the ingredients were readily available, but they also had a long and storied history that made them feel special. The sound of the vendor's voice is a gentle hum. Honey cakes, sweet and old, and it's a cry that speaks of a long and beautiful tradition. The smell is a deep, warm aroma of baked honey, a scent that is a universal symbol of comfort and home. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a classic. A simple treat that has a history as long and rich as the culture that created it. The feeling of that sticky, dense cake in your hand, its sweetness a comfort on your tongue, is a tangible link to a past that is both ancient and familiar. The taste of ancient honey cakes is still on your tongue, but the scene around you changes to a much harsher reality. You are in the open fields, and you see a man working the land from sunup to sundown. This is the life of a serf, and it's a life where your diet is not a matter of choice or convenience, but a matter of sheer survival. This is the harsh reality of subsistence farming, a world where your food is dictated by the land and the seasons, and every meal is a reminder of your place in the feudal system. A main historical fact is that the serf was legally tied to the land and had to give a portion of his crops and labour to his lord. This left him with just enough to feed his family, and often not even that. A quirky tidbit is that the serf's diet was almost exclusively grain and vegetables, with meat being a rare and expensive luxury. You can see the man eating a simple meal of a piece of dark bread and a bowl of pottage. There is no meat, no sugar, no spices, just the bare necessities. Historians still argue whether the serf's diet was nutritionally sufficient or a cause of widespread malnutrition. The truth is, it was a fine line. The serf had to work hard just to get enough to eat, and a single bad harvest could spell disaster. The sound of the man's hoe hitting the earth is a rhythmic, monotonous sound. A sound that speaks of a life of endless labour. The smell of the earth and the humble food is a reminder that for many, a meal was not about pleasure but about staying alive. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a matter of pure necessity. A diet that was as tough and unyielding as the life that it supported. The feeling of that simple, coarse bread in your hands, its taste bland and earthy, is a tangible link to a world that was all about survival. The harsh reality of the serf's life fades, and a new, more subtle, set of rules takes its place. The market is bustling again, but there is a strange rhythm to the eating and drinking. Certain days are meatless, and others are for fish only. This is the world of medieval fasting, and it was a crucial part of the diet, a series of complex and often confusing rules that were dictated by the church. This wasn't about weight loss, it was about spiritual discipline, and it had a profound effect on what people ate and when they ate it. A main historical fact is that the church's rules on fasting were incredibly strict, with up to half the year being designated as fasting days. Fasting didn't always mean going without food, it meant giving up meat, dairy, and eggs, and often meant that people had to be more creative with what they had. A quirky tidbit is that the definition of what was considered meat was often a matter of intense scholarly debate. Were beavers meat? What about puffins? Historians still argue whether these rules were a form of religious control or a way to ensure that people had a more varied diet. The truth is, it was likely both. The rules on fasting created a whole new market for junk food. On a fasting day, the greasy sausages and roasted meats were off the menu, but the fish fritters, the pickled eggs, and the lentil pottage were in high demand. Vendors would have to be prepared for the change, and they would have to be ready to sell a different kind of food on different days of the week. The sound of the market is a low, gentle hum on a fasting day, a bit quieter and more subdued. The smell is more fishy and more earthy, a testament to the fact that the spiritual life of the people was directly reflected in their diet. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a form of religious obedience. A simple meal that had a much deeper meaning. The feeling of that fish fritter in your hand on a fasting day is a tangible link to a world where what you ate was a matter of both survival and salvation. The quiet, contemplative atmosphere of the fasting day is shattered, replaced by the loud, chaotic energy of the medieval tavern. This is a place of boisterous laughter, shouted songs, and, yes, the occasional brawl. This is the social side of food and drink, a place where the simple act of eating and drinking was a communal, often raucous, experience. While the street vendors provided a quick meal, the tavern provided a place to eat it, and it was a hub of social activity, for better or for worse. A main historical fact is that the tavern was a central gathering place for the working class. It was a place where they could relax after a long day of work, socialize with their friends, and escape the drudgery of their daily lives. A quirky tidbit is that tavern brawls were so common that many towns had laws that held the tavern owner responsible for any damage or injury that occurred on their premises. You can see a group of men, their faces flushed with ale, arguing loudly over a game of dice. The air is thick with the smell of spilled ale, wood smoke, and the heavy aroma of cooked meat. Historians still argue whether the tavern was a positive or negative influence on medieval society. While it was a place of camaraderie and social bonding, it was also a place where tempers could flare and trouble could brew. The food, though simple, was a crucial part of the experience. It was the fuel for the conversation and the brawls, a simple meal that had a much deeper social function. The sound of the tavern is a chaotic symphony of human voices, the clatter of tankards, and the occasional crash of a broken chair. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a social lubricant. A simple meal that was a catalyst for both friendship and conflict. The feeling of that wooden tankard in your hand, its surface a bit sticky, is a tangible link to a world where even the most basic of meals was a part of a larger, more complex social dance. The clamour of the tavern fades, and you are transported to a small, enclosed space, a quiet refuge from the noise and chaos of the street. You are standing in a small courtyard, and you are looking at a small, well-tended garden. This is the kitchen garden, and it was a crucial part of the medieval diet, a place where a family could grow fresh vegetables and herbs for their own table. This wasn't about mass production, it was about self-sufficiency, a way for a family to supplement their meagre diet and to ensure that they had access to fresh, wholesome food. A main historical fact is that the kitchen garden was a central part of most medieval homes, from the simplest peasant cottage to the grandest noble's manor. It was a place where a family could grow a variety of vegetables like cabbage, leeks, onions, and garlic, and a host of medicinal and culinary herbs. A quirky tidbit is that the garden was often surrounded by a wattle fence to keep out animals and to keep the valuable food safe. You can see the neat rows of vegetables and the small patches of herbs, and the air is filled with the clean, earthy smell of fresh soil and green things. Historians still argue whether the kitchen garden was a luxury or a necessity. The truth is, it was likely both. For the serf, the garden was a way to get enough to eat. For the noble, it was a way to get fresh, high-quality ingredients for their elaborate feasts. The sound of the garden is a quiet one, a gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional hum of a bee. It's a sound that speaks of peace and self-reliance, a small, quiet rebellion against the chaos of the outside world. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a form of homegrown goodness, a simple meal that was a direct result of a family's hard work. The feeling of that fresh, crisp vegetable in your hands is a tangible link to a world where what you ate was directly tied to the land you worked. The quiet, enclosed world of the kitchen garden fades, and you are once again on the open road. But this time, you are not alone. You see a family, a husband, a wife, and a child. Sitting on a blanket under a large oak tree, they are sharing a meal that they have carried with them. And it is a simple, yet heartwarming, sight. This is the medieval picnic, a simple outdoor meal that was a crucial part of travel and leisure, and it tells a story of a different kind of junk food, one that was not about vendors or commerce, but about family and community. A main historical fact is that the concept of a picnic was not a modern invention. Travelers and laborers would often bring their own food with them on a journey or to a work site, as it was a more reliable and often cheaper option than buying food from a vendor. A quirky tidbit is that the food for a medieval picnic was often simple and portable. It would include things like hard cheese, dried or salted meat, and a loaf of bread. A small wineskin or a bottle of ale would provide a drink. You can see the family sharing their meal, and they are laughing and talking, their faces relaxed and happy. Historians still argue whether the medieval picnic was a result of a lack of options or a deliberate choice to enjoy a meal in the outdoors. The truth is, it was likely both. The lack of reliable and affordable food on the road made it a necessity to bring your own, but the act of sharing a meal in the open air was also a social ritual, a way to enjoy a moment of peace and togetherness. The sound of the family's laughter and the gentle rustling of the leaves in the breeze are a beautiful contrast to the noise and chaos of the marketplace. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a form of simple, unadulterated pleasure. A meal that was not about a transaction, but about a connection. The feeling of that dry, salty meat on your tongue is a tangible link to a world where even the simplest of meals could be a moment of joy. The simple, quiet picnic fades, and you are back in the bustling town. But this time, you are in a different part of the market, a place where the sweets are not made with honey, but with something new and exciting. You see a vendor selling small, colourful, and often ornately shaped confections. This is the world of street sweets, and it's where we see the beginning of the end of the old, unrefined diet. The increasing availability of refined sugar and new techniques allowed for the creation of confections like marzipan and sugar plums, a taste of luxury that was becoming increasingly popular. A main historical fact is that marzipan, a confection made from almond paste and sugar, was introduced to Europe from the Middle East. It was a luxury item that was often molded into intricate shapes, like fruits, animals, or even miniature castles. A quirky tidbit is that sugar plums, which were not plums at all but rather spiced seeds or nuts coated in hard sugar, were a popular treat. They were a testament to the fact that sugar was becoming more accessible and that people were willing to spend money on a sweet indulgence. You can see the vendor, a man with a steady hand, carefully arranging the colourful confections on a small tray. They look like tiny, edible jewels, a far cry from the dense, dark honey cakes we saw earlier. Historians still argue whether the rise of these street sweets was a sign of a new, more decadent society or a simple result of a changing economy. The truth is, it was likely both. The taste of these confections, with their clean, pure sweetness, was a revelation, but their true power was in their appearance. They were a feast for the eyes as well as the tongue, and they were a way for a vendor to show his skill and his customers to show their taste. The sound of the market is a bit sweeter here, a gentle hum of admiration and desire. The smell is a mix of almonds, sugar, and spices, a scent that promises a taste of something new and exciting. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a form of art and a sign of a society that was on the cusp of a culinary revolution. The very idea of biting into one of those beautiful, sugary confections feels a little bit like biting into the future. The sweet allure of sugar plums fades, but the feeling of newness lingers. Now you are back in the bustling market, but you are not a buyer or a seller, you are an observer. You are watching the people, and you are listening to their conversations. This is the world of the medieval food critic, and it was a crucial part of the food system. An informal system of reviews and opinions that dictated who succeeded and who failed in the street food scene. In a world without social media or review sites, word of mouth was everything. A main historical fact is that a vendor's reputation was his most valuable asset. A good reputation meant more customers and a better chance of success. A bad reputation, on the other hand, could be a death sentence for a business. A quirky tidbit is that people would often use a simple hand gesture or a specific phrase to warn others away from a bad vendor. It was a kind of silent language that was understood by everyone in the community. You can see a person walking away from a stall, their face a mask of disgust, and they give a small, subtle shake of their head to another person, a quiet but powerful warning. Historians still argue whether this informal system of food criticism was a form of consumer protection or a way for people to assert their social power. The truth is, it was likely both. For the buyer, it was a way to make sure they didn't get sick or get cheated. For the critic, it was a way to show that they were a savvy consumer who knew the difference between good and bad food. The sound of the market is a low hum of chatter, but now you can hear the whispers of opinions, the low, serious conversations about the quality of a vendor's wares. This is the ultimate example of medieval junk food as a social practice, a simple transaction that was a part of a larger, more complex web of relationships and opinions. The feeling of being a part of that secret language, of knowing who to trust and who to avoid, is a tangible link to a world where information was as valuable as gold. The whispers of the medieval food critics fade, and you are left standing in the quiet of the night, the bustling market now a silent memory. You are at the end of your journey through the world of medieval junk food, and it's time to reflect on the taste of history we've just experienced. It was a world of greasy sausages, hardtack, and pickled eggs, a world where food was less about pleasure and more about practicality, but it was also a world of innovation, of resourcefulness, and of a deep connection between the land and the table. A main historical fact to remember is that medieval junk food was not a treat, it was a matter of survival. It was a way for a society without refrigeration, transportation, or a reliable food chain to feed itself on the go. It was a testament to the fact that people will always find a way to eat, even if the options are limited and the risks are high. A quirky tidbit to hold on to is the memory of the different cries of the vendors, each one a unique song that told a story of a culture that was both chaotic and creative. Historians still argue whether the medieval diet was a testament to human resilience or a cause of widespread suffering. The truth is, it was likely both. It was a diet that was as tough and as unyielding as the people who ate it. A diet that was a direct reflection of a world that was both beautiful and brutal. The simple act of eating a piece of roasted meat or a honey cake was a moment of grace, a reminder that even in the most difficult of times, there was still a place for simple pleasures. The smell of the market is gone, but the memories of its scents and sounds are still with you. The taste of history, you now know, is not just about flavor, it's about the people who made it, the places they lived, and the lives they led. So, as you lie here, safe and warm, with a full belly and a world of modern food at your fingertips, remember the people of the past. Remember the labourer eating his hardtack, the traveller sharing his pasty, and the family sharing a picnic. Their struggles and their triumphs are a part of your story, a part of the long and winding road that led to the world you live in today. The light from your screen begins to dim, and the images of the medieval world begin to soften, their sharp edges blurring into a gentle haze. The sounds of the market are now just a soft, distant hum. You can feel your own breathing slowing, becoming deeper and more even. The journey is over now. There is nothing left to do but to close your eyes and let the warmth of your bed and the quiet of the night pull you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.